Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. My name's Lorinda Balone. I will be your facilitator today, and I'm really happy you're taking time from your busy schedules to join us. This is an inaugural brown bag for the Institute for American Indian Education. We are housed within the College of Education and Human Sciences. Our speaker today for this brown bag is Dr. Vincent Werito. He's an associate professor within the College of Education and Human Sciences at the University of New Mexico and in the Department of Language, Literacy, and Socio-cultural Studies. His research interests are in the following areas: teacher education, Indigenous pedagogy, Diné or Navajo education, Navajo language, and language cultural revitalization, Indigenous nation building, and cultural ecological sustainability. His past research has focused on the experience of Indigenous youth in education and identifying exemplary practices in the education of Indigenous youth. His latest research project examined community engaged research partnerships, community identified understandings of well-being and successful aging with a health research focus, which is really a new area for Vince. And I'm excited that he was brave enough to take this project on. And in the research he'll be talking about, I served as his academic mentor. So I'm beaming, I'm so proud. And I think we will begin.
Just hahasin should should in there. Do should tell the neto. Your toby how so do the national this age. Kehwit inigi at don't hit there yanato. Chetradness that inchle, not creating never she's chin. Kintle cheatney does it she to the chinny does it. Vincent Werito dashichine. Ako yat to Arnold Rock ehibedak ego. Nanel Jean de Egisinasha kundik at equa. El Dildasin ekest. Shalchin eholoto no shashe. Is Ani etan. Ako yat Good afternoon. My name is Vincent Werito. Welcome to this presentation, this, as Dr. Balone mentioned, inaugural Institute for American Indian Education brown bag. So I started off with an introduction, proper way of introduction, and also to acknowledge the relations Nazan Hema Hitaya Delkil Aro Atego Digin the Ne Holong Hatne Johat So in our teachings, in similar to the land acknowledgement, we always acknowledge the holy people and the land, the sky, and all the relatives. So I did that, and then I introduced myself. And so what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about the work we did. And I'll try to follow this agenda here. So this project that I'll be talking about was funded through the National Institutes of Minority Health and Health Disparities. And it's through the Tree Center, which is on North Campus. And the principal investigators, Dr. Lisa Kakari-Stone, and then the co-PIs there are listed there, Dr. Bernie, Dr. Braveheart, Dr. Sanchez. And so this project, which we've been referring to it as the TOC Wellbeing Project, or the Torion Ohuencino Counselor Wellbeing Project. And so this project was funded through the Tree Center as a pilot study under the Investigator Development Corps, who offered some grants to help folks like myself, early career scholars, researchers in public health. As Dr. Ballon mentioned, that's not my field, but because of my connections and work with communities, I was invited to do this study. And the Tree Center has been very supportive of this project and also of my work and their ongoing support. Their ongoing support has been really appreciated. So this was a one-year research pilot study that started in July 2018 and went up to, it actually went beyond, it went into September 2019. And as you see there, the academic research partners there are myself and Dr. Ballon, who I have come to relate to her as not just a mentor, but through our our clan relations as my shipija. And so also then we had our community partners and our partners included mentors and also a mentee. And then we also had some cultural consultants. And then just a larger community that we were working with. This is a picture of during one of our last advisory team meetings, the folks who were involved. Unfortunately, one of our members, due to COVID-19, has passed. So we were very disheartened and saddened to hear about that. And I think it just really highlights the impact of COVID-19 on our communities, particularly Navajo communities. So just to give a little bit more background of the communities we worked in, the communities that we worked with were Torreon, Star Lake, Ojo Encino, and Counselor. And when I did my introduction, I mentioned that I'm from Natnezhin, which in Spanish is Torreon. And I actually now, when I visit my father who lives in Ojo Encino, so I'm very familiar with the three communities. And as you see there, if you look at the map of the Navajo reservation, we're on the most eastern part of the reservation. And the area consists of tribal lands, state BLM lands, and allotments. So often issues of jurisdiction often become a problem in many ways, not just in terms of like land use, but just access to healthcare, access to different things in the community. So this is and what you're seeing here is a picture of, there's a natural spring here. So from where you're looking, if you were to stand here, this is where the spring is. It's a natural spring that's still used by the community people. And this is counselors. And counselor also is named after a white settler who started the store, and I think the store is still there now, taken over by the Navajo Nation. But the community is south of what's been referred to as Diné, and to this day, it still has a lot of significance to the people in terms of access to wood, for fuel wood, for also hunting, gathering medicinal herbs and stuff like that. So it has a lot of significance to the community. I just realized when I was going through my slides, I didn't include a picture of Torreon, but Torreon is originally where I'm from, and it was resettled after people returned from the Long Walk. And if you're familiar with Navajo history, it was a terrible time in our history when our people were imprisoned at Huelte and suffered there for 4 years under military suppression, I guess you could say. And, you know, it's important that we really highlight this because it relates to the work of, for example, Dr. Braveheart, who talks about historical trauma. And oftentimes we don't acknowledge that. We don't acknowledge legacies of oppression and how it manifests today. And often even to the point where, as Alfred there mentions, Yaki Alfred, people begin to internalize that, you know, our way of knowing, our way of understanding often might be inferior to Western ways of knowing. And so, which has really had an impact on our communities because also we're dealing now with oil and gas development, particularly in fracking. And there's a lot of division now between community people because of oil and gas revenues. So some families have access to revenue from oil and gas. And then there's others who are obviously concerned about the environment. As I mentioned, how people are still living off the land. But even things like, for example, the roads, how they've been impacted, the air, obviously. And also the research that has happened, there was a study happening around the same time we were doing this project as well. It was a health impact assessment study that measured the air quality. So there's also other research happening there coming from the community, from the grassroots organizations that have come together to address this issue. And as a lot of you are familiar with Linda Smith's work, you know, even this idea of research has become a dirty word. So when you mention research in these communities, often people don't want to get involved. And because of past experiences where people from outside come in, do research and never share back with the community. And also this study, being a behavioral mental health study, was really looking at health disparities. And so when you think about the social determinants of health, which are the conditions in which people are born, in which they live, grow, and age, and how often when those things are impacted, you know, due to things like fracking, access to healthcare, education, employment. So you see there that when the inequities are high, then the health outcomes are worse. And so we actually use this slide to really get our community members to really understand what we were focusing on. And I think this visual really helped them to see where we were going with this project. So some of the things that we were really thinking about was how can academic researchers, such as ourselves here at UNM, how can we build partnerships with our communities to address health disparities? And I would even include educational disparities there. What ways are our communities sustaining and revitalizing using their community cultural wealth? You know, so some of the things I mentioned, like the traditional ecological knowledge, but also just the language and culture. Some of my work with language, you know, as some of you are aware, language shift is a big issue in our communities. And so how are our communities working to reverse language shift, for example, but also even related to that are other things. How are our communities using their own knowledge to address their mental health? concerns. There is a Navajo Department of Behavioral Health who have programs, different things happen in the community, but it's, I would say, not very community wide. It's not community wide. Only people who maybe are referred to them, are serviced by them. But oftentimes the larger community is not aware of these programs or are aware of the traditional healing that might be available out there. So, so this study was really trying to understand what are the behavioral mental health disparities in our communities, but really also to look at the cultural strengths of our communities and to build research capacity by creating a community university research partnership. And that's what this study was really, how it was designed. And to also use community engaged research process from a Diné-centered paradigm. I'll talk more about that. And really to get at how do our community people understand well-being. And what we really wanted to emphasize was the, again, the cultural knowledge of the community. And again, it didn't have to be like traditional stories or it was just what did the community people know about, if there's an issue in the community, how does the community respond to it? How do they come together? Things like that. So our objectives were to create a community advisory team, which we did, and then to assess our capacity, or the capacity of the community for participating in research. And since this was a community-based participatory research approach, we used a community engagement survey. And then part of this was also to do bi-directional trainings. So we worked with community people where some of the meetings we talked about, again, what is research? What does CBPR mean? Just even what is research overall? But also what does it mean to collect data, analyze data? And then in turn, also they shared with us their knowledge about how they understood these research activities. And then initially we set out to do 3 community focus groups, but we only ended up doing 2. And then at the end, we really made sure that we went and shared back the findings with the community, being that this is again a CBPR study, and then to disseminate our finding. So again, just to reiterate, the community engaged research design was to really build that community university partnership to address our health disparities, but to also identify existing resources. And what was, I think, really unique about this project, and even, I guess, innovative, was the word we used was enable. And as Diné people, a lot of us maybe have different and various levels of understandings of Ket. But we wanted to see how the community understood and talked about that and how they continue to use that. And so we wanted to enable that. And then using a DCRE, Diné-centered research and evaluation methodology, to then talk about developing our own culture site-based, place-based health interventions. And then with the goal of developing future community action plans, currently we're working on a policy brief. And also other initiatives have come from this, which I won't talk about now, but so this is a model, conceptual model of a CBPR. So you see there that context is very important. So the historical, social-cultural historical context, and then partnerships, and then the research process, and then the outcomes. And one of the ways that I've learned to understand CBPR is it's research with community people instead of doing research on or in communities where you're not necessarily working with the communities. So the idea of doing with was really center to this, which I think really resonated with the DCRE approach. So this came from the work of the late Dr. Larry Emerson, Dr. Herbert Benally, and others. I think I just saw one of our cultural consultants, Dr. David Sosi, Yat Ish, and let's good to see you here, who also has been really instrumental, along with Dr. David Begay, to help us really frame what does this mean and what does it look like. And the important thing here for me is to look at research from a Diné lens. That the neck echo shechait a panza kesti research with yagi. Even that term research, how do we talk about it? What's the word? What's the translation? Those kind of things really were interesting in the conversations we had. I always think about what the late Dr. Larry Emerson always said about how we need to think about Diné knowledge as its standalone knowledge, that we don't need to add to it, and that we need to believe in it and trust it. So, and so some of the things we did was we really had to engage with our not just the immediate local community of people, but the larger community. So there's a group who meets regularly, and they are called the Diné-Centered Research and Evaluation, DCRE group. And one of our relatives, Hazel James, has been really taking the lead on a lot of that work. And so they were helping us along this process as well. And again, just really trying to understand how do we do research in our communities using our own nsahakes nahata inasihasan. Ako to the neck ako nsahakes nahata inasihasan. Khatash ati ne ako kaya nilzen go inna. Pansahakes bayatke nahatado be siwinzen. Kaya illegal pansahake go baka inado paachaya. So those were kind of things that came out of the discussions when we talked about what is CBPR, what is CBPR research. So out on the next part there, participatory. So this really was getting at, again, just those, when you go back to the conceptual model of CBPR, what do those four pieces mean? And at the end there, research, hojongo inapa ansahakes, hojongo inapa benahata, hojongo inna benaidikid ado kaya kebe inanaljon ben ye inna benaidikid. So those were some of the ways that just listening and participating and trying to make a sense of what we were doing. So these were things that evolved from the meetings. So I guess another way to think about it is in terms of our core values as Diné people, in terms of relationships acknowledging and honoring our relationships, and the idea of reciprocity, giving back, not just taking, but also the idea of inquiry, critical inquiry, looking at our issues as Diné people ourselves, you know. And we found, and what I found, at least I should say, is in talking with others, is that these are things that happen in our cultural things that we do, the cultural events, everything from like ceremonies to everyday living. These are things that happen. We don't call it research necessarily, but there are processes at work, and I think it's really a matter of then trying to think about what does it mean in terms of the research that you're trying to do. So some of the things we did was to convene, again, the advisory research team meetings. We administered our surveys. We ended up doing 2 focus groups. We analyzed the data together, and then we shared back our findings. Here's a picture of one of our meetings. I think this was in Farmington. And then we also had other cultural practitioners. This is Dr. I keep calling him Dr. Avery Denny, but I think he should be Dr. Avery Denny, but Avery Denny from Diné College, who was gracious enough to come all the way out to Torreon from Tsaili community to share with us his knowledge about Ke. And then taking that presentation, we spent a lot of time again talking about what are we trying to do. And we also talked with, as you saw in one of the pictures earlier, Dr. David Begay talked about research, again, using the Sacred Mountain knowledge. I'm not going to get into that, but so this is how it came together. There's just some pictures of the things we did in the community. We actually had a local person who had a food delivery truck, and so we brought her to the meetings, and people were really happy to have a warm meal for lunch when we had our meetings. And sometimes we had a lot of people attend, as you see here, elders, younger people. I'll say that we didn't, one thing we didn't do was we didn't bring the younger people under 18, not because we didn't want to, but in terms of the pilot study, since it was a 1-year project, we did, we were sort of pressed for time in some ways, but we also really wanted to look at what are the elders and the older people, what are some of their concerns. And so, but we did have some younger people in the meetings. And some of the initial responses when we talked about the project was, you know, for example, they would say, so I'm just sort of translating into Navajo some of the things that are written here. The last quote there was really a powerful one for me. When I heard it was, you know, we need to do something now for our children so they'll know what we did today. And so these were the responses, the reaction to the project. This is from the community engagement survey. A lot of the members were happy that we were really beginning to do this kind of work. They said it was really, really much needed. Again, as we enabled, and then we brought the meals to the people. We're really appreciative of that, having that space to talk about it. But one of the things that really came from the survey data was that, for example, the idea of trust was really significant from the beginning, because in terms of, again, going back to a lot of the people that came to the meetings, we reestablish our relationships. And by way of that, or they knew, like for example, my father or my mother growing up, so a lot of the elders, so that's how they were able to come to the meetings. So in other words, it's who they knew, like, and who was related to them, and it's what brought them to the meetings. Another thing was when we were talking about partnerships, you know, are the community people aware of you know, what's going on in the community? And a lot of the people that were involved knew about things that were happening. For example, the fracking that was happening, some of the challenges that the 3 chapter houses, Torion, Ohunsino community, were dealing with, because we're so far away from central Navajo, Window Rock, that a lot of times just even getting a road maintained was an issue. So the chapter created an alliance. They call themselves the Tri-Chapter Alliance. So those things were happening, but the other part of that was they were really, I think, inspired to see that there was actually research involved in these efforts, so that it'll support some of their work. So some of the things that came out of the dialogue, for example, was we found that it's very hard to just talk about some of the disparities, and namely some of the things like depression, mental health issues, maybe stemming back to, for example, boarding school experiences, and then going even further, there were issues about how a lot of the community people, for example, didn't know their relationships to each other, and then the division in the communities. And I think this is also happening in other Navajo communities across the reservation, is there's a division between the religious groups. For example, the Christian Navajos, and then the traditionalists. And so something that was said was that, you know, we can't address all of these issues, and that's really not what we're trying to do. We need to focus on hojongo ina, hojongo nata. Again, I think the response was at the end from the surveys was that the advisory team members were glad that we were able to have these kind of discussions, and to really refocus on our, I'll use the term ancestral knowledge. And I'll explain why. Some things that people talked about was that, you know, I felt like I was involved in something, and I was part of this. So I think one of the things we found from the community engagement part of this study is that we need to have researchers really understand the community history, the issues that are in the community, not just from an outside perspective, but the inside perspective, but also really getting a sense of the structural inequities, you know, the causes. So it's not just, you know, it's not just about, for example, access to healthcare. There's deeper issues there. And then the last one there that I is that so no one can do it for us, that we need to do this ourselves. That was really, I think, the piece that was really stand out. Oh, this is the same information, but another picture of it. And then we did community focus groups, as I mentioned. We ended up just doing 2 because it was really the CART, the Community Advisory Research Team, who decided that, you know, two would probably work, because people had different schedules, and some people it worked for them on weekends, some people said during the week, and so it was just challenging to try to organize all of this. But we did have a large turnout, which, you know, in terms of focus groups, might not be ideal, but it was still very valuable, I think, in the long run. And this is something that, again, Dr. Sosi and Begay, after the focus groups, we took all the notes that were written on Post-it notes, and then we shared with the group, and this is what they came up with based on the work we did together. And so going back to that model, that initial models that I showed you, that had aim 1 and aim 2 and the sacred mountains identified, we went back to that framework, and we found that, for example, the people in the community, their perspectives about well-being were that it's about positive thinking, positive attitudes, motivation, starting life or day with prayers, taking care of self, wellness, eating good, nutrition, exercising, and then social, emotional development, taking care of family, relatives, expressing relationships, and then going back to respecting each other, different beliefs, and also, again, really reiterating the holistic perspective. Ahojit ego kept coming up. That's part of our Navajo teachings. That was often mentioned. So in terms of, for example, the questions were, what are some behavioral health issues? And here are some comments that were made. So in particular was this one here. In many homes, there are parents who are afraid of their children because, you know, in some cases, young children or children of parents would be like abusive to them, and they would turn violent, and they would, so things like that were happening. And then another one here is, this was often brought up, was we don't know each other, we don't express our relationships. And then some talked about the impact, again, of boarding schools. One that really, I think, stood out too was access to healthcare. Particularly the elders who talked about, you know, all the medications that they get, but they weren't sure what they were exactly getting it for. And then also the other one was just the loss of cultural teachings, particularly among the young people. But to also ask about how do you maintain well-being? And folks talked about getting together with each other, not just during holidays, but just on an ongoing basis. I think this speaks to our cultural resilience as a people. Talking to each other, helping each other, guiding each other, mentoring. Again, prayers were whether it's in the Christian sense or the traditional or the Native American church. It was brought up often. And then in terms of, again, going further with how community people maintained it, just some of the things, for example, like raising your own food, growing your own food, things like that were often brought up by elders, and they talked about their childhood, but in some cases they were still doing that too. And I think just overall, it was really going back to that TOC well-being model that I showed And I'll show another one here. And we went back to the communities with all of these responses, and we got more input from them. We talked about it some more. And this is what we came up with. So earlier I was talking about this idea of ancestral knowledge. So regardless of our maybe diverse differences in terms of our religious beliefs, and even the generational gaps between old and young, or even in terms of people who maybe now live primarily in urban areas and just come back into the communities, or the people who live there now, what we came with was that, what we came to from the responses was that we all share the language, we all identify as members of our community, that we all still practice our community values, and that we all live on the same land. And so that's what this diagram is. And then taking it further, aro inna ket ati lingo do ako hinina kayat asa kehuit. So that was really, I think, the overall message was, so it's, the way I see this is that our ancestral knowledge is what got us to this point. So again, the or oral tradition, the stories, but also the practices, the teachings that continue with us in the land that we live on and our relationship to it. So we've then continued to disseminate our study findings. We also, with the help of Dr. Ballone, we developed an infographic sheet. This was shared back with the community people. I took this out to the chapter meetings, shared it with community people. And so to finish up, this was really about re-articulating our community narrative. You know, the narrative about our communities is often from someone else's perspective. And so through this project, I think we were able to come up with our own community narrative, and that we needed to really embrace our own teachings, our own way of thinking, and to overcome our dependency on others and to realize our strengths. And embedded in this is this idea of a Diné-centered politics and pedagogy. And then also, we must remember our ancestors. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Wish we could all clap, everybody clap. I'll open it up for questions.
This is Sylvia. Vincent, thank you for sharing the work. You're doing amazing work. Both of you, Lorenda, mentoring him, and it's amazing to see the model that we can all learn from in engaging communities. I think a question that always comes up as we look at community engaged scholarship is this issue of how communities look at the impact of the work. How would you, what evidence or what pieces would the community offer as impact on the communities? It looks like there's a lot of documentation, right, on the survey results and those pieces. And I think there's always these Western views that we quantify the impact, and the quantification was done through the surveys. So I'm just wondering also, what are other ways that the community talks about the impact of the work? I was curious to hear about that piece as well.
I think going back to where I mentioned we shared back with the community. So when we did that, we didn't just have our community advisory team, it was also open to the larger community. But we also went to the chapter house meetings, and often those are attended by more people. And I think the reception to what we did was very positive, but also it spurred some more conversations there. Unfortunately, I didn't like document that, but just some of the issues that came to head, particularly around education, like and education of our people. And another issue that came up again was related, or partly because we shared the infographic sheets, was meth was a huge problem in our community. So in one of the meetings, a young man stood up and he said, you know, this is a problem that we need to address right now. So that was really powerful. And I, to date, because of COVID-19, we haven't really been able to continue to disseminate the information, but I've heard at times different people talking about the work we did. So
yeah, no, that's powerful. And I was curious to hear about, yeah, I'm just wondering about next steps, right? Because if with the youth and the use of meth, it almost seems like, I wonder if a next step might be bringing in the youth, right, to engage them in that piece, or what your thoughts are on those next steps.
I kind of rushed through the last slide, but in one of the slides, it talked about the when we shared back to the community, we actually had really good community dialogue with the people who were in attendance. And some of the things that they mentioned were, we need to create, like for example, people said, we need to come up with a family learning center. People also said, we need to share these ideas with the youth through curriculum, and also to think about just that next steps. And some of the things we've done since then is we're also now working on a successful aging study. That was an outcome of this study as well.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Another next step is also because of the community's experience in being active researchers and active in research, they've also partnered. In my receiving an R01 just last month, they're going to be one of the tribal partners to develop their own family prevention program targeted with 4th, 5th graders and a caregiver. So they'll be part of that study. So, I mean, it's led to other research work,
Right.
and their interest to continue that work.
Thank you. Thanks.
Anybody else? Sure, Wendy.
So I'm turning my video on real quick. Hello, Dr. Werito and Dr. Balone. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really appreciate it. One thing, also, I just wanted to also recognize Brianna for actually being the inspiration for putting this virtual talk together and stuff. So thank you so much. So I wanted to actually ask you, you made a statement earlier about behavioral health on the Navajo Nation. And why I asked this question is because it's going to be relevant to the work I'm currently working on. And you had said that that people weren't aware of the programs, that your 3 communities weren't serviced. And I just wonder, did you ever reach out to behavioral health to find out why your communities weren't being served by this really, it seems like an important agency, but also if you intend to like share back with them some of the results of your analysis and, you know, where the source and the roots of mental health issues occur, but also some of the recommendations from your community to help resolve those.
Thank you for that question. We didn't, or I didn't reach out to Department of Behavioral Health, but in the past, my father used to work for them, and they had an office there in Ojo Encino. So from my understanding, a lot of the work they did was with clients who were referred to them. But so when I say people aren't aware of some of the things they do, is they didn't know like what some of the services they did because they weren't being referred to them. So some of the traditional things that I know that they do were like sweat lodge, group counseling using traditional stories. So I think those things weren't necessarily open to the community. There might have been instances where, for example, a school teacher might reach out to them to come and share things, but beyond that, it was just limited to that. But I don't recall exactly what year, but that office was closed. And so there's not an office there in the community now. And so I think the office that people go to from our communities now, when they're referred to, is in Crown Point. So, but the other thing that working with the Navajo Nation IRB is one of their requirements to do research on Navajo is that you share back with the larger community. And so they told us that we needed to identify a program. And I think the one that, so I'm glad you brought it back up because that's something that we're thinking about is, and I thought naturally the Department of Behavioral Health would be the one we would share our study with because it's relevant to a lot of what they're doing.
Did we have another question? So as part of reporting back to the Navajo IRB, Vince has also been recommended to report to other tribal departments and offices. So he's been working with the Navajo IRB to make sure that happens. Another question. Lloyd asked, what do the three communities think of the project at this point? Dr. Lloyd Lee with Native American Studies.
I think, again, going back to the responses, initial responses when we went out, I think people are eager to talk about these issues. I think they're also thinking about practical ways to do that, but also having some outcomes, right? To really see, again, I think related to the question from Dr. Saldon Baptiste about, not just where we go with this, but what does this mean for our communities? And again, going back to some of the chapter house meetings where we went back to share this project. Again, I can't speak for all the communities. I can't say that all the communities are saying this, but from the people that we heard from, it was very positive. They appreciated this study. They wanted to, as a matter of fact, people even after the study was almost done said, can I participate? Can I do something? And so it's I think at a point where it's just a matter of, I think, continuing that partnership. So some of the things we're doing now hopefully will lead to more involvement. And we can't hear you, Lorinda.
I muted myself. So let me just add that this is a community impacted. These communities are impacted by fracking. And so in voicing their concerns and particularly their health concerns, they didn't really have anything to share as evidence of the impact. So that's how the focus of this study was, well, let's first understand what is well-being. To say there's an impact, how can we quantify that for the funders, the other researchers. So that's why this study was done. Let's first understand how these communities understand well-being. So the next steps eventually are to then develop measures, metrics, and how do we measure those changes that the community is experiencing based on their understandings? How do we develop measures so that we can see that there is a difference based on the fracking activities? Dr. Werito also mentioned there was another study going on currently soon when this study started, and they took a health impact assessment survey that was developed back east, and it had like 5 questions. Nothing that could really describe the community's experience of fracking in their communities. So although that study, there's been some disappointment in that study and some of the results, but so that's the reason why our study came along, and we're hoping long term that's what we'll be able to develop as a measure. I hope that answered your question, Lloyd. So thank goodness the community is excited to join. Okay, well, that puts us right at 2 o'clock. If there's another question, we're happy to entertain it. Otherwise, we thank you for those who could join us, and we thank you for those who have to leave us.